Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. I just wanted to drop in today to just give a short thing. I'm on holidays, obviously, with my family all at home, and so it's been kind of difficult to get some filming in, so I thought I would put up just a short video about maybe something that I thought might be able to help some people with their New Year's resolutions. So I'm an English student. If you haven't seen the video that I made, I will link it up there. And that means that I do a lot of reading, or at least I did a lot of reading. I haven't really done reading for pleasure, I would say, since I basically started my degree. But last summer I did manage to get in one before reading lists came out. So basically within the span of 3 days I read a book. Great stuff. But yeah, I thought it was a really great book and I really recommend it. So maybe if it interests you, you might like it. I will make sure to link a copy down below, and it'll be from a proper bookstore, because we are trying to not buy things from Amazon. If you have local bookstores, I would definitely recommend trying to go to them or doing click and collect during these times. Because a lot of local bookstores are really struggling, and it would be really great to keep them around because they are genuinely such nice places to be. So without further ado, here is the book. So this is David Attenborough's book, The Zoo Quest Expeditions, and it's basically an autobiography. It's not immediately clear that he used ghostwriters. It's probably, I'll explain later, like, I would be super surprised if he'd used ghostwriters. And it's about his earliest expeditions in the Zoo Quest series, so in like the early and late 1950s. It centres itself around 3 separate journeys, so it's split into 3 pieces. And there's the first one, which is to Guyana. The second one is to Indonesia, and they are looking at finding the Komodo dragon. And then the third one is Paraguay, and they're focused on finding and filming armadillos. So yeah, like I said, the 3 of them, they're mostly going to film content for his TV shows that he's doing with the BBC. But unfortunately, and something that he does regret, they are actually also catching animals and sending them back to zoos in the UK to basically be seen, and sometimes he brings them on his television show and all that stuff. So yeah, there is a little bit of capturing, for example, this monkey and all sorts of exotic animals to bring them to zoos here in the UK, and he does express regret for that, and that's something that I will also touch on a bit later. But genuinely, I think this is such a good book. I think the first thing that struck me immediately was that it sounds just like him. Like, he's an absolute delight to listen to when you watch his shows, but like in my head when I read this, it sounds exactly like him. It is absolutely like mind-blowing. If he has a ghostwriter, as I mentioned before, I'm not entirely sure. I didn't really look into it. They are extraordinarily talented. Like, they captured his authorial voice incredibly well. If he doesn't, which is personally what I'm leaning towards, because this is just too impressive, like it just sounds too much like him for that to be the case, then he's an incredible writer. Like, there's no other way of putting it. He writes exactly as he sounds on the TV shows that he presents, and save perhaps for all of the knowledgey details that he may or may not get input from experts on. I would say that if this is his writing, then he writes his scripts 100%. It sounds exactly the same, although this one is a little bit more narrative. It doesn't have quite as many like facts as his narrations do on his TV shows. So let's just quickly talk about the physical version of this book. This is just a book. I don't know how much it cost. It was given to me for Christmas 2018. See, this is what I mean about not getting to read for pleasure on an English degree. But it's hardback, and it's got this sleeve underneath the sleeve. It's actually a really nice, like, old looking book, and I just love this aesthetic. I think when it goes on when I am a grown-up and I have a fancy bookshelf, 100% it's gonna go without the cover. I think a lot of mine will go without sleeves, but put my book aesthetics aside. On the front cover, you can see it's got loads of like, it's got coloured illustrations. So on the covers you can see these quite like detailed coloured images, and they do continue throughout the book. So throughout the book, in the text, you'll see sort of black and white images, but there's these two sections of white which you can see, which is like almost like when we were kids. We used to look for these pages in books, and it's got coloured illustrations of what they are talking about. It's not always put in the best place, like in terms of where they are, but it is like really, really surprisingly excellent quality. And might I just say, but like, oh, you can see it better here, he was quite the looker. Like, that's young David Attenborough. He looks great, to be honest. But it is really interesting to see such high quality images from the 50s, because we really don't expect it. We really do think that it was all like black and white photography, but it is clearly not just black and white photography, and some of it is super high resolution, like really very impressive. So second, I want to go into like quotes. My favorite thing about reading excellent books is that there are quotes that just stick with you and kind of stay with you. So I want to start with his descriptions. He has obviously seen some just incredible things in his career, but it genuinely seems that these earliest thrills he saw are still so vivid in his mind, and I would love to know if he can describe like any place that he's been in this kind of vivid sense. So I'm gonna just put in a couple excerpts of me reading small portions of this, because like it's just such a stunning visual that he creates with his writing, and honestly it's worth it for just that. And I just think it says so much about him that he would remember everything in such vivid detail, because even if he has a ghostwriter, the ghostwriter can't create this. This has to be sort of envisioned by him, even if he's not the one necessarily articulating it. So in this extract, he is on a boat sailing through the islands of Indonesia, trying to reach Komodo, but the wind has stopped, and so they've been sat flat for quite a while. So, poking my head outside, I saw 300 yards away a large school of dolphins. An area of the sea the size of a football pitch was whitened and flecked with their splashes as, filled with the exuberance which seems to possess all dolphins, they leaped from the waves and curvetted through the air. Some, less energetic, broke the surface of the water with their foreheads only and cleared their lungs through their blowholes with the loud snorts which had aroused me. When we first saw them, they were travelling obliquely towards us as we lay motionless in the calm, but as we watched them, they visibly changed their course to come and inspect us. Within a few seconds, the school was all around us. We hung over the side, peering at them through the shifting green translucencies of the water as they cavorted around our bows. They came so close, swooping through the water, that we could see every detail of their bodies, their beak-like mouths, the large dark blowholes in their foreheads, and their humorous eyes, with which they, on their part, looked quizzically back at us. For perhaps 2 minutes they gambolled about us. Then, puffing and splashing, they moved off towards the island on the horizon ahead. We followed them with regretful eyes, and once again we were enveloped by the stillness of the sea. The next one is just a couple pages later, and they have progressed slightly, and now they are encountering some coral reef, and he decides to go swimming in order to take more film and images. The water was shallow. Through its distorting ripples we could see that coral lay thick beneath us. We put on face masks and breathing tubes and dived overboard. We had both swum under water before, so the sensation of entering a world bearing no relation in scale, colour, sound or motion to the one we had just left was not a new one to us. We were both, however, quite unprepared for the glory of the reef. We hung disembodied and weightless in the crystal water. Beneath us the corals, pink, blue and white, grew in humps, spikes and rays, some like angular stony brushes, others like great boulders, their surface convoluted like that of a brain. Scattered among the clumps and thickets, a few isolated free-growing colonies lay indiscriminately like white dinner plates. Purple sea fans branched above the coral, and here and there we saw sea anemones of size unthinkable to anyone who has only seen them in colder seas. Their many-coloured tentacles formed a carpet several feet across, and as vagrant currents passed them, they waved like a field of corn with the wind upon it. Vivid royal blue starfish spangled the white sand between the concentrations of coral, and sinister giant clams lay 3/4 buried, their crinkled jaws agape, exposing their brilliant green fleshy mantle. I touched one with a stick, and it soundlessly slammed shut, gripping the stick like a vice. Among the clams and the starfish lay black sea cucumbers spotted with pink, and thronging the water were fish. At first the riotous proliferation of the creatures of the reef seemed haphazard, but soon we began to perceive the glimmerings of a pattern. One of the most brilliant of the fish, a tiny creature of such an intense and dazzling blue that it seemed almost incandescent, haunted only the dwellers between the sparser coral clumps. The emerald parrotfish, its jaws marbled with veins of yellow, lingered only among the pink staghorn coral, where, with its tiny mouth, it nibbled at the coral polyps, its main food. A smaller, delicately shaped green fish swam only in schools of 20 or more, and each school had its own particular patch of sand above which it hovered. They fled at our approach, but when we looked back they had once again taken up their station over their own territory. We could only expect to find a little orange damselfish among the forests of anemone tentacles, where miraculously it moved freely without being stung to death, a fate which would overtake any other fish venturing so close to the tentacles. Our explorations were interrupted by the rising of a wind. Once more our little prow began to move eastwards, but we could not desert the reef so soon, so we threw rope nooses over the ship's side, and grasping them, we hung below water so that the ship pulled us slowly over the reef, every yard producing a wonderful new variation of the pattern we were beginning to discern. Soon the coral began to sink farther beneath us, and then suddenly the bottle green water changed to deep indigo, and the seafloor disappeared downwards into unseeable depths. We climbed regretfully on board. There were sharks in these deeper waters. So that's all of the gorgeous descriptions that I'm going to share with you. And now I just want to talk about one of the things that perhaps interested me the most, because there are a couple sections here. I'm just going to pick out two that I thought were quite shocking, where he does things that are characteristically now we wouldn't even consider. Even climate change denialists wouldn't necessarily do some of the things that we see him do. And definitely he expresses regret, as I already said, about the whole capturing animals and taking them to zoos. He now doesn't necessarily appreciate zoos and doesn't agree with them, but it's just really impressive to see him go from these situations to the situations that I'm about to read a little bit about, to like kind of one of the main faces of the conservation kind of movement, and the environmental awareness campaigns that have been going on, certainly recently, but in his case for decades. I'm gonna start with one that is from just next to where he sees the dolphins, which kind of, to me, make it a bit worse. When we awoke, the island we had seen during the night was in exactly the same position as it had been 6 hours before. We had not moved an inch. All that day we lay becalmed, slowly pivoting on the blue glassy water. We sat and smoked, casting our cigarettes over the side where they remained, so that in the evening the still water in which we lay was covered with an increasing accumulation of our own litter. We glared at the island ahead of us. Hassan and Hamid slept. The captain lay back on the tiller, his hands behind his head, staring vacantly at the sky. So this image is a stark contrast to the two sections I just read about the dolphin and the corals. It's such an image to think of, and you certainly wouldn't think of David Attenborough as being the one. I mean, now it's kind of a given that all of these seas have rubbish in them, but he tells us himself that these were largely untouched waters, and a lot of the forests and areas that he visits in both the other journeys are untouched. They're undeveloped. They weren't, commonly covered by human beings, and now obviously that's changed. He does reflect on that for sure, but it's just a really kind of stark image to think, oh, the beauty, he describes the colour of the water so gorgeously, and the way that the dolphins kind of break through it and it's flat and it's, perfect. And then to think that they would just throw cigarette butts and rubbish in is just kind of bizarre. It's just completely unthinkable to us. I think there are very few people left in the world, at least I hope, at least that's my experience, that would just consciously throw rubbish into the sea. Like, it's just completely unthinkable to a lot of us. And I mean, that's a great thing, obviously, but again, it's just something that I find really interesting that he included, and it just goes to show that he developed as a person. And then you also see little vestiges of colonialism. So between these two sections, I would say that we get a lot of sort of character development from him, because we know him now as someone who would absolutely never do that. In fact, like, I would find it difficult to believe that he smokes now. But you know, he just, the fact that he's probably grown. You know, it's not his sort of area of expertise to be talking about race and colonialism and all that, but he certainly talks now with a lot of respect for Aboriginal tribes and peoples, and especially in the work that they do in conservation. A lot of his new films are based on this, in fact. And I just like that this was included, completely unfiltered. It was just added there as a fact, and it is a fact that is, you know, unfortunate, absolutely. Of course, he's probably ashamed of the idea that he threw cigarette butts into the sea when there was wildlife there, but especially wildlife that likely doesn't really exist to that degree anymore. But I'm really glad that they included it, because it gives a lot of thought and reality to the story. You can see his journey going from a guy who catches animals to send to zoos and throws trash into the ocean and you know, is perhaps not correct in his nomenclature. You can see that evolution if you look at his recent work. He's become the face of a conservation movement, and that just shows growth as a human and development. And he's certainly been in the public eye for a long time, so it's just really special to be able to see someone develop, because it's not often that people, particularly very qualified men such as himself, taking that kind of responsibility and saying, I was wrong, but this is what I'm going to do better, kind of thing. So there is another book that I haven't got around to reading yet, but honestly, for leisure or for learning, or if you're just a David Attenborough or environmentalist, you know, enthusiast, I wholeheartedly recommend this book. It's complex in its themes, it's vivid in its description, it's super well written, it flows well, it's just genuinely very interesting. It's something that's it's a topic that could be quite mundane. It's basically a travel narrative, right? He just, you know, goes around doing stuff. He's just doing his job. But genuinely, he has made it so interesting by way of just appreciating and describing the nature that he encounters, as well as his little constant facts about the animals that they're hunting down and the you know, the peoples that they encounter and the cultures that they encounter. I mean, just an incredible read. Super interesting. Definitely a good one that helped me kind of relax and decondense in the evenings. Just hearing his voice in your head is super relaxing. I absolutely recommend this. Even if you're not a huge reader, I think this is a good one. As you can see, the text is quite well spaced, it's quite big, and so it's definitely appropriate for, you know, all ages kind of thing. The vocabulary, as you might have heard from some of the extracts, can get a little bit dense, but you know, it's not that bad really. Huge recommend for David Attenborough's ZooQuest expeditions. I will put a link below, but if you can, please try and buy from a local bookstore. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, be sure to press the like button and also subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.